I didn't break the planet. It was this way when I found it, all right?
Everybody laughed when I first said I wanted to be a comedian. Well, they're not laughing now, are they?
You know why it's laminated, don't you? To catch the tears of joy.
It's a Celtic phoenix. People are thankfully being stupid again.
Welcome to Gurus of Comedy.
With your host, Dave Keeshan.
Welcome to Gurus of Comedy. I'm on the line today from somewhere near West Cork, Dakota Mick. Well, that's the only name I know you as. That's not your real name, is it?
No, it's the name I got when I moved over here to Ireland. You know, 'cause the Irish, they can't call you by your real name.
No, you have to find something else to call you. Particularly a name like Mick. It's like they're everywhere.
Yeah, and that was totally the story. Like when I first moved there, we're living in a small village in West Cork, that one wasn't West Cork. Like once they start to get to know me, they were like, "Oh, what's the name?" I'm like Michael O'Connor, and they're like, "Oh, Mick." But then they couldn't call me Mick because I already had a Mick. So then they had to figure out which type of Mick I was, and eventually Dakota Mick is what they stuck with.
Bizarre, because I go to America and I get called Mick, and
Yeah.
And you are based down in Cork. You've been doing some stand up around there.
Yeah, for the last few years, but obviously this last year has been pretty pathetic.
Oh well, it's not been great for anybody. Yeah, I grew up in Cork, so it's an interesting spot, alright. I'd say trying to keep up with the speed. Have you got the lingo down? Did you go?
Yeah, but I try not to use it. I'm trying to stick to my own.
You don't go down for go down walk pana, no?
Nah.
Do what now?
But but I've been here for 20 years, so I've heard most of it.
I got you on today because I've been having some great podcasts recently. Every time I ask people what they want to talk about, it's nearly always, can I talk about cancel culture? What? Yeah, cancel culture. And I was like, which is very important, but it's like everybody wants to talk about it. So I was like, okay, I wouldn't mind a bit of a break from cancel culture. I think you and I would be getting in trouble on Facebook a bit too much, so I've had to avoid it for a while.
Yeah, I have to learn to just be quiet.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I think my metric is if you are arguing on the internet, you're automatically wrong. Doesn't matter what you're talking about. You've already made the first mistake. You know, it's only like a descent spiral into madness after that.
Yeah, I think realistically, if you're going to be, and I don't even want to use the term argue, but if you're going to have a debate, you need to be doing it in person, where you can actually talk with each other with a bit of manners and hopefully not end up in a fist fight by the end of the night. You know?
Well, my revelation recently was to stop using the phrase "you" and start using the phrase "one" when you're talking about something. It's like, I don't think you should be doing that. People get their hackles up, but if you say, I don't think one should be doing that, they kind of go, okay, they're talking about the generic you, not me specifically. And I found like all these conversations seem to get immediately diffused when you kind of say, I'm not mean you. I mean the general you, of which I might be one of those yous, but not you.
That's probably a good point, because I think that is the problem. Everybody does take everything personally.
And that you is just, it's so overloaded, you know. Maybe the Queen was onto something, you know, the royal we, you know. We aren't amused. So, with that in mind, the reason we're not talking about cancel culture today is because we're going to discuss probably one of the biggest comedians I've never really gotten into, which is amazing. It was Richard Pryor. I was, just before the call, I sort of said to you that for people my age, which is 44, Richard Pryor starts for me with Superman 3.
Yeah.
A bit of a bumbling kind of character. But you kind of go off and look back, and he was massive. Like, that was the tail end of his stand-up career. Do you want to kind of detail a bit?
Well, I mean, like, for me, too, like, I'm slightly older than you. I got 4 years on you. But, like, for me, it would have been the movies like Superman, and some of his earlier, like, especially the ones when he was with Gene Wilder, some of them movies. But like for me too, that was my introduction to him. But then also my dad was a big fan of him and had a lot of the records, because, you know, back then they used to get them in the records. And so when I did become, like, my dad wasn't, like, my mom used to go crazy because Dad started playing those records to me when I was about 9 and 10. Like, you know, my dad, he didn't like to have a good time alone.
Yeah. Well, you say, oh yeah, he probably uses a couple of bad words in there for
yeah.
an 8 or 9 year old.
Yeah.
It's like, what does motherfucker mean?
Yeah, and especially like growing up like in South Dakota, like I did, like he was talking about stuff I had no clue about, which was quite interesting to me, or not interesting, but just an eye opener to me.
Sure. So for some context, he apparently was born in a brothel, was it?
Yeah, he was raised in a brothel there in Pryor, Illinois. He was born 1940. And like, I mean, a tough background. His dad was a prize fighter, and depending where some people say a hustler, but he was a pimp, you know. And his mother was a prostitute. And an alcoholic, and he was raised pretty much by his grandmother, who actually ran a brothel, and he grew up in a brothel, which is just, quite the eye opener, I'm sure, to grow up in,
Well, definitely an interesting place to start getting stories from, for sure.
Yeah, you know what they say about comedy, it's such a fine line between humor and tragedy that, he probably had such a rich vein of tragedy to basically mine from.
So he would have been very similar to Carlin, I believe, in that he started in the 60s and would have had a very safe act,
Yeah, like if you see his early work, like the early 60s, like basically he was a big fan of Bill Cosby, which until recently was, one of the kings of comedy. And if you look at his earliest work, it's very clean. It's just him, just trying to be humorous, but trying to be clean, more playing on the silliness rather than any intellectual comedy or any thoughts of who he was or what he believed. And actually, I mean, the big incident for him was, I'm trying to remember what year was it, in 67, when he walked off the stage in Vegas at the Aladdin. And up until then, he was just doing this silly comedy, making people laugh. He was there on stage looking out at this crowd in Vegas of just basically all people in suits and ties, and he just like, what am I doing? And I think he literally said, I don't know, what's the story? Are we cursing on this broadcast, or we got to be good?
Oh yeah.
We got to be good.
No, you can swear all you want.
Yeah. No, can I just say, because I think he was like literally standing there looking at the crowd and said, said to him, like, what the fuck am I doing here? And then walked off stage. At that time, like, he was blacklisted.
Right.
Vegas blacklisted him, and I think that was 67 when he did that.
I tell you, times have changed, because I go into meetings, I walk out of every meeting and I say the exact same thing. What the fuck am I doing? That's how I start meetings, And
yeah.
Any open actions.
Yeah, that's it. And then from there, like, when he left there, he went to Berkeley, California, which in 67, 68, that was the center of the counterculture in America. That's where he basically started, like a lot of drugs, started exploring his own thoughts and his own thought process.
So that would have been, in the 70s. So I've recently just completed a book, I'm Dying Up Here, which there was a TV show a while back based on the same book around the same time, the Comedy Store in LA. Yeah, Pryor kind of pings in and out of that story. But yeah, like a meteorite ricocheting off a planet. I think he was well established in the comedy scene by the time that club started. So he would presage all that kind of stand up as we would know it. But definitely cutting his own path with his own stuff, his own way. And really, the 70s, he seemed to absolutely just be on fire.
Oh yeah, I mean, between like album after album, and they were just, each one was going gold and platinum, and he was in movies, he was writing for shows. He was involved with everything.
Mm-hmm. Now I I should actually call out my accidental pun there when I said that he was on fire. I didn't mean it.
Yeah. 'cause
We're not getting ahead of ourselves.
That didn't happen until 1980.
Yeah. So just spoilers. Apparently, he was freebasing one day and accidentally set himself on fire, which he was horribly. Well, he was scarred because of it, physically.
Yeah, and I mean, like for a while there, they weren't sure if he was even going to make it. He was so badly damaged that it was touch and go there for a good week or two.
So for someone who is of your vintage, he definitely would have been. Yeah, like how influential was he in your kind of experience with comedy and time? And
I guess, like, for me, like, growing up in South Dakota, there was no comedy. Like, you didn't go to a comedy club in South Dakota. But for me, like, it was through my dad. And my dad really, like, Dad was a big fan of Carlin, but Pryor was his main guy that he really liked. And he would always, like I said, he'd get the album. And then also, like, see, like, my dad growing up, for me, my dad was actually a Vietnam vet who did 3 tours over in Vietnam. And he was a platoon sergeant with the Marines.
mm-hmm.
And so even though, like, my dad grew up in Nebraska, his experience in Vietnam, most of the guys that he fought with were Black Americans.
Okay.
For instance, like me growing up, if ever there was a talk about racism, my dad was like, well, if I would have been a racist, I would have been dead. That was his idea of behind racism, from his standpoint. But then he missed being with the Black guys from Vietnam. He liked their humor, and he liked, the way they interact with each other. And so he kind of he really liked Pryor because of that. It was like the same type of humor that he was used to and he missed.
How were Black people in North Dakota treated when you were growing up?
Well, to be honest, there was none of them there.
Right.
I never actually met Black Americans. Well, except for occasionally one of Dad's buddies from Vietnam would call through town and maybe stay with us for a few days or a week or two, and Dad and his buddy would, basically get messed up for a week or two. That was the only Black people I met until I actually joined the Marine Corps myself. And, then, so that was they just, like South Dakota, where I'm from, it's all just whites or Native Americans. That was it.
It was probably more of a window into. It's hard to imagine that that's the American world that was kind of your world, but also at the same time wasn't.
Yeah, that's it. Like mine, like I almost came from the opposite extreme. Like a few of my buddies from the Marine Corps would have grown up, in the projects and stuff. Their reality was that they hardly knew any white people because of where they grew up and who they interacted. And then mine was the opposite, just because, and it wasn't because we were trying to avoid them. There was none of them there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'd say that when I grew up in Cork, we just didn't have a lot of foreigners. Just weren't turning up. And when I lived in Australia, like one of the things, if you meet someone from Thailand in Australia, typically they were born in Thailand, so they'll have a strong Thai accent, and that's just the way it is. So that's kind of what I got used to when I met Thai people. And then I remember went to a Thai restaurant in Cork one time up there near the Waterstones, and it was a Thai restaurant, and this girl comes out, she's Thai. So I thought, just trying to speak clearly to her, and said, "Are you right there, like? You got anything for you?" Purest Cork accent I've ever heard. I was, what's this? I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, oh no, that's it. And it's hilarious when you see that, or because it's just like, oh, wait, that's not what I was expecting.
So it's kind of interesting to see Pryor kind of, I mean, obviously Eddie Murphy and Chris Rock would call out to him a lot, but Dave Chappelle is kind of very much of the hour. I think he did this set recently after the George Floyd stuff, so he has a very interesting presence, and I think you were saying like he was involved a lot in writing a fair bit of TV. I just saw there that he actually helped write, was it Blazing Saddles?
Yeah, and the only reason he wasn't in the movie was the production company weren't willing to get insurance for him because they basically didn't trust him because of all the drugs and he was a loose cannon.
Right.
So that's why he didn't actually get to star in the movie. Crazy, but
Oh, there you go. Him and Bruce Lee. So seemed to be the similar time as Bruce Lee was supposed to be in as a kung fu, and and they ended up kind of giving it to David Carradine.
Yeah, and that's it. And there again, it was Bruce Lee's story. Like, he was the one that actually came up with the idea.
So he definitely, I don't know, I suppose a bit like Eddie Murphy. He kind of seemed to kind of drift out of the stand-up and went into the movies then. And the 80s seemed to be just a list of movies. I kind of, looking at him now, I kind of recognize a lot of them. Brewster's Millions, Moving, See No Evil, Hear No Evil. I still remember the trailer for that one.
And that's it. Like, I mean, the 80s, after 82, 83 is kind of, he didn't really do any more big comedy shows, and then it was, like you said, it was just movies when, he was in everything.
Yeah, I just remember him in the Hear No Evil, See No Evil, where he's like, is that what it is? I taught you let one go. I don't know why that stuck in my head.
Yeah, no, that's it. I just always remember him just like, I guess my memories are more so like him and Gene Wilder, the kind of the way they used to play off each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, that's it. He was just, he was such a big influence on the movies. But then, like, on the comedy, the amount of comedians that would, basically harken back to him as one of the major influences.
Oh, he's huge. Now, I kind of wonder how would he survive nowadays. Like, he's got such a questionable past that he seems to be held up. But you could be someone like Cosby. He's like, you live long enough, they kind of find you out. He definitely wasn't a choir boy, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's the problem with modern comedy, because I think the great comics, are damaged.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's kind of the same thing with boxing. Boxers, you never get a great boxer who grew up rich.
Right.
It's it's the poor guy that becomes the great boxer. And I think it's the same with comedy. It's the person who's really been just gone through the mill. Because, like, comedy is one of the way of dealing with running through the mill.
Well, you think that you can't be a good comic?
No, I think you can be a good comic. But to be a great comic.
Where do you sit on Michael McIntyre then?
He's not my cup of tea, to be honest. I can respect what he does, but at the same time, it's anybody could be doing it. And I don't mean that in the wrong way, but it's cookie cutter stuff, and it's just not. He's not my cup of tea anyway to begin with. But then my problem is I grew up with Vietnam vets, and their humor is so dark that for me, kind of like dark humor was almost the norm, and because my dad's attitude was like, well, if you're not going to laugh about it, you're going to be crying about it, so that's kind of, and I think Richard Pryor came from that same type of mentality that if I'm not laughing about it, it's going to destroy me.
Yeah, well, it's definitely like I find a lot of comics, they use the stage as a kind of a free therapist sometimes.
Yeah.
Which I think the only problem is that no one believes a single word that they say on stage. That they open up their heart and they walk off and they go, that was so funny. So that happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's those type, and I also think there's I use the term comic in quotations, that think that stage is for them to be a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
To get across their message, and that's what they view it as, a platform for getting their message across, which is okay if you're being funny. Like, for instance, you take Pryor, like when he became himself, he was talking about his truths and being funny about it,
Mm-hmm.
And like, obviously offending some people, but like, you gotta sometimes you offend people when you actually speak your truths.
So I've been doing this podcast now over the past few months, where a lot of people are stuck at home. It's very easy to get guests at the moment, I have to say. because they're like, oh, I'm stuck at home. I'll do anything at
Yeah.
all. So I've
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
I've been kind of doing a bit of a study, somewhat in kind of the mentality, and it's well, and I think you and I kind of were on this conversation on Facebook somewhere where, it's the things, people trying to almost like censor what you can say on stage, and like again, this is the you versus one. I think some people had a problem with what comics say to each other behind the scenes and how they treat each other. That can be quite rude. And I said, well, that's unacceptable. But when you're on stage, if it's kind of in the guise of a performance, I think it should be a lot more, I don't know, liberated, but kind of, I think you're trying to walk it's like you're trying to walk from A to Z. You're trying to kind of bring people along for the journey, and you might go to weird places, and it's because it's weird is why you go there. Some of the conversations say, oh, you shouldn't even go anywhere near there because it will offend. And it's like, but like, it's because it's up against offensiveness is why it kind of takes people kind of to the edge of their comfort zone. And it's kind of where the laugh comes from. And like some people, that's just what their style of comedy is, But But the other thing I think I've come to the conclusion is I think our big problem is that we all go under our own names. That you perform as you and I perform as me, so they kind of think what you say on stage is a function of what you really believe. Whereas I think sometimes you have these people kind of go out as a caricature. They'll even have a completely different name, and I think they get kind of a bit more of a pass because it's sort of I'm consciously telling you from the outset that this is a comedy character, and I think that allows people to be more comfortable with the offensive things they say is.
Yeah, that makes sense, because like you said, when you're using now, technically, I'm not using my own name, but it's the name I'm known as here in Ireland. But that is like it's almost like if you're using your own name, then it's almost like you're signing it, saying this is me, this is what I believe, or this is what I think. But I do think comedy is supposed to not always have to, but like part of our job is to poke the bear, to make things uncomfortable at times. Now that's not really my style as a comedian. Like I tend to be a comedian that I'm just trying to get the laugh, and I tend to like to use myself as the butt of the joke if I can. On stage, I'm usually not trying to, although I mean I will stick it in there if I can. Whereas there are other comedians like you just said who are there to, like, say for instance, like Carlin.
Mm-hmm.
Carlin was always trying to poke the establishment. The topic now is like, oh, you can't, hit down,
Punch it
that
down.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, punch it down versus punch
punch it down. The whole point was to punch everywhere. And I kind of almost think like comedians were almost like the modern version of the jester from that concept, where the jester's job was to poke fun at the king.
Fool. Yeah, I completely believe we are the fool, but the famous line though is like, at the end of the day, the king is still the king and the fool is still the fool.
Exactly. That's it. And that's it. You can still end up on the, if you go too far at the end of a rope.
But I think Carlin's kind of style, I mean, he does the 7 words, but I think the actual DNA of his style was in the word, was a cocksucker, in that, you can say cock and you can say sucker on TV, but you put the two of them together, you can't. It's like, it's the same words, but somehow through some alchemy of what, it becomes something you can say. And I, like all the other stuff, you can say, well, that word said always is always a thing, but put these two together, it became something else. And he really seemed to kind of drill down in just the kind of, the contradiction, even in just something about word order. I think everything kind of came out from that.
Yeah. And what's interesting in that kind of thing, like say the power of a word, is even like Pryor's kind of battle with the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
Because like before like 67, 68, he didn't use it in his performance. And then after 68, it was in, every other line in his performance. But then at the end of his career, he dropped it again after kind of deciding that, it wasn't a good word to be using to refer to a black man as that. So even he battled with even just that one single word.
Mm.
And yet it was such a pivotal, because when he was using it in the 70s and stuff, that was the thing. It was like say for instance, like say me hearing it being said like that, knowing that I'm not allowed to say that, but at the same time it was there, and then others, for the black community claiming the word, like there was a lot of just a lot of importance just in that word and the way he used it. But at the same time, he fought with his own feelings about it.
Well, it's like, I suppose, you have a lot of cases where marginalized cultures take ownership of a word that was used against them, and then like it's almost like we're taking this word back from me, and it's become our word now. But I know I feel a bit strange about it when there is that kind of but then you can't use it.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things like for instance, like me, like I would have never used it growing up.
Sure.
My dad did with his buddies who were like his Vietnam buddies.
Mm-hmm.
He'd use it with it, but that was the relationship they had with each other. And Dad wasn't using it like in a derogatory word. He was using it because that's how they spoke to each other. And like for instance, when I was in the Marines, I had a roommate who him and I were roommates for almost 2 years, and we used it amongst each other. But him and I used to always, we were always trying to use the most derogatory terms we could with each other,
mm-hmm.
because that was kind of our relationship, But it was not a word I would use other than in that context.
But one would have to worry about, and I think this is true everywhere, is like if a third party hears in on it and they don't have the context, and then
and that's how I almost died.
Well, there you go.
Because my buddy and I, we were so comfortable with it that one night we went out clubbing, and he brought me to an establishment where I was pretty much the only white guy around. And then we got drinking, and late at night, I was chatting up this one, and next thing you know, he told me to get a drink. It was my turn to buy a round, and without thinking, I said, "Shut up," and I've got it, and of course, everybody within earshot were like ready to kill me, and of course, my buddy was like, "No, it's okay," and the two of us like, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" So we kind of we cooled it after that, because that was close.
I mean, I found. I don't know what your exposure to Irish people would be now and where you sit, having spent so long here, but we swear a lot, and we swear a lot in kind of just conversationally. But when we travel,
for me it was great because I came from the Marines, so back home in America I was always in trouble for swearing too much. But then I came over to Ireland, and it's like, I fit right in. So it was great for me, Oh,
it's great, but I went the other way. I went to America and Australia too for a time. And it's only then you realize how much you just even use the word fucking for punctuation. It's fucking down the fucking day. I was chatting to this fucking guy about fucking, and they're looking at you like you're like some sailor or something, and you just kind of have to wind it back a tiny bit.
For me, it worked out great though, because I was going the opposite direction.
You just can never go back now.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so it's been a really interesting chat about Richard Pryor and comedy and swearing. I don't know what are we going to do? I have this theory. I'm going to swing by you. The comedy. We're going to be. I think you and I have discussed. There's probably going to have to be two types of clubs. There's the woke club and the non-woke club from now on. I think I know which one I'll be performing in, but I think we're going to have something like a mass comedian, where you go on and do your material, but no one can see who you are anymore. It's probably going to be the only way you can kind of do dangerous material from now on.
Yeah, or you're just going to have to not care if it doesn't ever become a proper career for you.
Oh, I think that ship is sailed.
No, me personally, I think if we ever get to do comedy again, I'm not trying to get into the comedy scene or get into the clubs. It's gonna my attitude is that you're gonna have to find your own way
Mm-hmm.
and kind of stick with the people. Like I'm not going to try to impress people that I have to not be myself in order to impress them. You know, that's my attitude with comedy. And the thing is, I always find when I'm in front of a crowd, they seem to enjoy it. You know, so it's just a matter of finding your crowd. I think that's what you have to do. You know.
Well, hopefully we'll all get back at some point. You're going to have to show me where all the clubs are in Cork. I don't know where they all are anymore. They all seem to move around.
Yeah, right now, it's going to be hard to know how many of them are going to come back. That's the big problem.
City Limits, that's probably been the only consistent one down there from even 30 years ago. But the rest, I think they all kind of move around.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. City Limits, and even there, I wonder how. I haven't heard anything from there, so I have no clue what's going on. The Coca Club was trying to get a few. They got a few gigs going in the Kino, but that's been shut down again with the new restrictions. So, who knows?
All right, well, I think I'm going to have to do a podcast on when everybody opens up, and we can just find out where comedy is again. So we can all get back out
definitely. There. Yeah, I mean that's it. I'm dying to do some gigs anyway.
Everybody's going to be absolutely bedlam.
My wife is sick of my jokes at this stage.
Oh well, that has nothing to do with comedy or comedy clubs being shut. I'm in dad mode at the moment, so I'm getting to use all these great jokes. Well, what did Thor say when he stubbed his toe?
Unfortunately, my two kids they're teenagers now, so
aged out.
Yeah. So
no,
it doesn't work anymore.
I'm taking advantage of it when I consider that all this A material, just kind of
That's it, and when they're at that age, they'll laugh.
All right, so let's going to sign off. Anyone can find you online, Twitter.
Yeah, I'm Dakota Mick on Facebook. That's kind of the main place I'm at anymore. Although I'm questioning my existence there at this stage, and I'm on Twitter too, but I don't have much of a following there.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't quite figured out how to use it properly without, So that's me, Facebook, Dakota Mick. You can hop on there and yell at me.
If you're questioning your very existence on Facebook, I think you're doing it right.
Yeah.
And I've been your host, Dave Keeshan, and this has been Gurus of Comedy. We're on anywhere you can get podcasts. If you could leave us a review, that would be fantastic. And we will see you again. Goodbye.